Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the latest webinar in our monthly series focusing on providing Kansas companies with insights and tools they can use to advance their international business. We hope you will enjoy today's program as it addresses a very timely subject of virtual international marketing for business-to-business international sales. Now, before I introduce our featured speaker, Karen Page, I would like to go over some brief housekeeping matters for today's event. First off, we're recording the webinar today, so you'll be able to access it at a later date, should you want to do so. We will forward all attendees the link to the video once it's been posted. We also look forward to your questions. We will manage those through the chat feature, and don't hesitate to ask them at any time during the webinar, but we'll reserve some time toward the end of the program to address them. Today's webinar subject is something we've really been digging into ever since the start of the pandemic last year. Some of the best practices we will be discussing today have been in place even before the pandemic started. Others are new to the greater reliance everybody has had to place upon virtual media as they conduct their international business. Importantly, however, all of these have taken on a much greater prominence due to widespread travel restrictions that are still in place and the tremendous disruptions that have happened to traditional trade shows and trade missions and the like. So in order to dig deeper into these virtual international marketing best practices, we decided it would be a great idea to contract with our long-term trade promotion partner here in the state of Kansas, Kansas Global Trade Services, which is based in Wichita. Today, we'll examine some of the early results from that ongoing research. Well, let me introduce Karen Page, a longtime friend of mine and certainly a partner with this agency in Kansas Global Trade Services, as I spoke before, in terms of providing Kansas companies with quality support and help to help them increase their exports overseas. Kansas Global Trade Services, Karen Page, is the president and CEO of that organization. It's a full-service trade advisory firm that helps companies and communities leverage their capabilities and global reach. She brings decades of trade experience in the private sector and with government officials alike. She earned a global MBA from Georgetown University and a bachelor's in international business and economics from Wichita State University. And so without further delay, I'd like to hand the program over to Karen and learn a little bit more about what she's found out as she's undertaken this inquiry into best practices. So Karen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeff. And let me just begin by saying that when you first approached us about exploring best practices in virtual international marketing, I was both intrigued and, like maybe many of our listeners, confused, like what does that mean exactly? But it has been an absolute pleasure to dig into this. Spent the past few months looking at reports from big name companies like Deloitte and digging into the tech industry and seeing what they do. But perhaps the most important thing is I've spent time with 16 different states to discover what they're doing to help their exporters in this realm, as well as talking to service providers who every day provide expertise to help us do virtual marketing and digital presence. So let me begin by laying the framework for what you really need to do. And this presentation is geared toward the exporter and really designed to help you figure out simply what you need to do next. Next slide, please, Jim. I can't remember everything. I don't know if you all are like me, but if you give me a list longer than 3 or 4 or 5, I can't remember. So I gave you a list of 3 things here that you really need to take in order to find some success in virtual international marketing. I've lumped them together basically in these three different areas. You need to incorporate your digital tools and platforms into your sales practices. So you have established sales practices from networking to trade shows to trade missions, for example, meeting with your distributors, going on sales trips. You really need to take a step back and intentionally incorporate these digital tools and platforms into those established practices that you already have. You also need to look carefully at optimizing and localizing your website. As one service provider said to me, Google US is not the same as Google Brazil. So if you have market opportunity in Brazil, you really need to localize your website for the Brazilian market, for example. The third thing is, and this is a little bit of a newer concept, and some of the thought leaders in digital practices are really starting to emphasize this. There's some newer information, published research about aligning your corporate leadership's online presence with the online corporate brand. Perhaps you're like me and you came kicking and screaming into the social media world. I distinctly remember a few years ago when one of my staff members said, "Since you're resisting having a Twitter account, I made one for you. Here it is, and here's the password, and you're going to do this." I have to tell you that this research that we've been working on has really changed the way that I think about my online presence and how I use social media. The concept here is that, like you may have heard when we talk about agriculture, the consumer is really interested in where the products came from. This is a little bit similar. It's not just that we go to the grocery store anymore and we're satisfied with the product that we're buying. We want to know more about it. We want to know about the company that's producing it. We want to know where that product came from. With quality product is not enough anymore. And the same thing applies for your digital presence and your online presence. The consumer of that information really wants to know more about the company and about you as a person. And this has largely been accelerated because there's a blurring of lines between the business world and your corporate presence and your home life. Like right now, I'm talking to you from my home. I've barred the animals from my office, but you might get to meet my cat Max. I don't think he can open the door, but he might surprise me. So just to summarize this slide is you need to incorporate digital tools and platforms into your established sales practices. You need to optimize and localize your website, and you need to align your corporate leadership's online presence with your corporate online presence. And I'm going to go into some more details on each of these concepts in the next slides. Jim, next slide, please. So we're going to dive a little bit into digital tools and practices. And what this basically mimics, aside from social media, is your established sales practices modified to the digital world. That is really where we are today. There's not any panacea or magic bullet that we're looking at in terms of these new tools and practices. So if you think of it this way, it's a modification of what you're doing to the digital world, including for virtual meetings. It's really efficient, cost efficient for you to use virtual meeting platforms to establish a new relationship, to explore a potential distributor partnership or a partnership, to see what opportunities might exist. So instead of getting on an airplane and traveling to meet someone or having them come to visit you in Kansas, you can use this virtual meeting platforms very intentionally to prep you for, a long-term partnership. The most common platforms that are used are WebEx, Zoom, Teams, WhatsApp as well. In the US, what we found is that many governments are really using Teams, the Microsoft Teams environment, which is what we're using today. But when they actually look at cross-border interaction and communication, they actually look more at WebEx, sometimes Zoom, and many of them actually are using WhatsApp as well. So you might want to think about the tools that you're using today and how you use them to talk to different people in the world. And social media, I've talked a little bit about this, about aligning the company's virtual presence with your virtual presence. And the content and consistency in the post is key. And everything should be pointed to your website so that it gives folks an opportunity to find you, learn more about the products you're selling. LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube are the most common platforms used. So if you're not on those, you might want to take a look at that. I'll talk a little bit more about content in a future slide. These are really important tools to have at your disposal. And when I think about advising companies in Kansas, I'm very conscious of the cost it takes to implement any of the things that we recommend. In the case of social media, you're really not talking about a huge amount of cost coming from your checkbook. What you're really looking at is time that you must dedicate to this. In terms of virtual and hybrid trade shows, I will just tell you, the jury's out on this one. I heard from many people that they participated in virtual trade shows and got absolutely no results from it. And they were very frustrated and would never do it again. I also heard from an equal number of people who said, oh my gosh, we actually got new sales or we found new distributors. So I think that this is something you actually must consider. I think what we're going to see is, as we move into the future, is that the digital tools that come from a virtual trade show, they exist longer than if you just went to the trade show and you had a week of time at that trade show. So those are really important and valuable tools that you have. You can continue to have those conversations both prior to the trade show happening and afterwards, and they're all really easily accessible. Really to take advantage of that digital networking. And then about your website, you really have to prioritize and localize, but to do that, you have to know what your priority markets are, because obviously you're not going to want to do the whole world at once. So where are your priority markets is going to be really key here. And I'll be stressing that again and again. Knowing your priority markets is a best practice in trade in general, but in terms of virtual international marketing, it really comes to the forefront. Next slide, please, Jim. So optimizing and localizing your website. You might have heard of this terminology before, and I'll just tell you that for about 10 years, one of my very dear friends who has a company that helps folks do digital marketing, and it's his area of expertise. He's just brilliant. He's been fussing at me for about 10 years to optimize our website. And I'll just tell you, it just, like, I got it, but not really. I didn't really do anything about it. I was wrong. So let me just encourage you to really take advantage of optimizing. And what that means is that you're allowing your website to be found by search engines. So the keywords that companies use to find your product, if they were doing a search online, they need to be really embedded and prominent in your website. And I'm not an expert in this. Jeff would be more, know far more about this than I do, but that's the gist of it. I said earlier, Google US is not the same thing as Google Brazil. So for example, if I do a search here using my Google search in the US, I'm going to find things that the algorithms point me to that are going to be part of what they think would be most accessible. I wouldn't necessarily find a company in Brazil that I wanted to do business with because my search engines aren't really optimized to that. And we have to make those changes. So the modification of your website is really important. Digital content is king. This makes me have a headache because running Kansas Global, this is something that we're concerned with. What are we producing in terms of digital content? Using videos, for example. My staff has been fussing at me to do more video, and I tell you, it just intimidates me. But here's what I learned. Absolutely have to have digital content, and video is the biggest and fastest growing segment of digital content. So, producing a video and putting that on your website, using that through social media is going to be really important to have successful virtual international marketing. When you look at what's going on in the rest of the world, in particular, not just in the US, video, video, video. So instead of just putting out your marketing collateral in terms of what you might have a modified brochure that you have on your website or that you might send by email, you really need to take a look at how you can produce that and produce video content. When you're producing video content, for example, you need to really take a look at providing a transcription or a closed caption on the bottom of the screen. It's really helpful to people who are looking at that video. If they don't speak the language that you're speaking, it's easier for them to read it on the screen, and so you want that. It also helps the, if you're looking at search engine optimization as well, if they have that text that's there as well. Again, aligning the social media and your website, you need all your social media, your digital content to point back towards your website, and your website is where you can start capturing those sales opportunities. Next slide, please. So here's this one that I really had to adjust my brain to, and I'm still adjusting. Aligning the corporate leader's online presence with the corporate brand. Man, guys, this is so, like, I hate doing social media. I just hate it. For me, my daughter's 23 now. I can't believe that. She's 23 now. And the only reason I had a Facebook account for years was so I could monitor her online activity. Okay, I've morphed a little bit from that, but really not a whole lot. So really, in order to be successful in the business world, we really have to be more diligent about what we're posting on social media, consistent posting, and have digital content behind it. One of the things that I would recommend is that you take a look at mapping your network in terms of the digital world. So how are you connected with, what accounts do you have, for example, LinkedIn, so, and Facebook, for example, or even if you're using Instagram and YouTube, who's looking at your accounts? How are those linked together? And think about it as a map. It'll look sort of like a spider web where you take yourself, put it in the center, and you can connect all the dots. And that needs to happen actually for the key personnel in your company as well. The reason you're doing that is to provide those connections so you can identify sales opportunities or sales partners. And then let me just say one last thing on this. It is really important that it's not just about the product and about the corporation as we would traditionally think about it. The values and the character of the company and you matter. So when I was talking earlier about when we go to the grocery store, we want to know where, the origin of the product. We want to know about the company. We want to know about their values. This is really applicable to everyone, not just those food products in a grocery store. So when you think about producing digital content, when you think about the posts on your social media, it's not just about your product. It's not enough anymore just to talk about your amazing products, which all of us here know Kansas companies produce fantastic products that have demand throughout the world. Start talking about what's important to you. You could think about it in terms of goodwill, or your social responsibility is one way to kind of look at that. So that is a difficult task, and it's going to take you, I think, some time to think about it, map out those digital networks, and really what the commitment here is this commitment of time to your online brand. You're going to have to develop it. That is where I would like to stop, Jeff, and see if you and the team or our audience have any questions. I really intended it to lay out these broad strokes and concepts so that we could have a conversation. Much more detail behind these, this sort of summary that I'm happy to answer as the questions come. And then just a note that this is a moving target. This is in development for everyone and not just for us in Kansas.
Well, I think that's great, Karen. Thank you very much for really talking a lot about some of the things that people have to be thinking about. Let's go ahead and jump into what I will call sort of the fun part of the session as well. I've got some thoughts and some questions that I'd like to be able to run by you to maybe stimulate some further discussion and investigation into some of these broad themes, which again, you really sort of parse them out nicely in a very clear and logical fashion. Just kind of going back to your first slide, and Jim, you don't need to bring that up, but I've got it here in front of me. The first element there was incorporating digital tools and platforms into your sales practices. I think nothing could be a stronger statement as to what you need to do. I mean, after all, what are we doing here but creating an integrated approach to marketing, so that just as in the past we've brought in tools that have replaced other kinds of ways of doing business, whether it's bringing in email to replace the fax, or bringing in now video communications to be able to augment or supplement the traditional ways of face-to-face meetings. All of these things give us a whole range of additional kinds of tools, again, to be able to do this kind of thing of virtual international marketing, or indeed sales, international sales. And so the integration of all these and the referencing back and forth between those vehicles, and really taking a look at which particular vehicles or techniques are best at being able to present which kind of information, I think is an extremely useful way to approach this. The second major point you raised was talking about optimizing and localizing your website. You talked a little bit about the optimization, the ability to be able to make use of search engine optimization, the ability to enhance the way in which companies can find your online presence and your website. But it is also key, in addition to doing that, and there are ways to do that using some of the technologies that are out there. You can use Google AdWords, you can use search engine optimization, you can be able to make sure that you come up higher in the rankings, et cetera, paid search, organic search, a whole host of tools, which we're really not going to get into in this session. But as you engage in that, I think it's really important to think about ways in which you are able to address the foreign language needs of the communities that you work with. And so to the extent that you can integrate in some level of foreign language representation for target markets into the website, that's a good thing. Now, there are more sophisticated ways that you can do this. So you can talk about actually placing servers, loading up servers in the country that you're targeting with your information, so that it can enhance the way in which that information is available. You can streamline some of the ways in which it's communicated. But that really can be beyond sometimes the reach of many small companies. But still, there are ways in which you can, again, integrate in some level of foreign language presence, and I think that that's a good thing. All of us, whether we speak a foreign language or not, and to the level that we speak that foreign language, make use of machine translation, whether it's Google Translate or other kinds of tools. But I have to caution those who may not have a great familiarity with foreign languages that machine translation really is just sort of a crib sheet. It many times can give you a great idea about what's being discussed. Sometimes it's right on what the subject is that the person is looking to be able to translate using that tool. But other times it can be entirely misleading. And so even though I speak a couple of foreign languages, and feel very comfortable in terms of interacting with those languages in those environments that make use of that language, I still also draw upon machine translation and Google Translate, because it's a quick and fast way to be able to gain an understanding of what's going on. But I caution everybody to not rely upon it, and certainly don't rely upon machine translation for your own marketing presentation. If you have to, people will make use of it to look at your website and try to obtain some understanding, but it really can not reveal some of the greater nuance or detail of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to present.
Jeff, can I jump in there?
Absolutely. That's what I hope to have happen. Go for it.
I actually have a call scheduled for this afternoon with an exporter from Wichita who used a machine translation tool, and they're working with a great big company. I won't name them, but a great big company, right? And the great big company came back to them with feedback on the machine translation and said, this is not even close to good enough. This does not represent us well. There's grammatical errors, et cetera, et cetera. problems with this, and we can't have that out there, because this is our name that's, that we're putting out there, and this is not good enough. And my response to them was, there's a difference between professional translation and machine translation. And the way I look at it is, machine translation, Jeff, as you just said, is really good for you to understand something. Like if you want to read something, right? It's like, what does this say? And you don't speak that language, right? So you can say, I'll use Google Translate to figure out what it says. But when it's your name that you're putting out there, your product information that you're sharing, professional translation, I think, is key. And that can be quite expensive. I mean, that's you're paying for a professional service. That's a commitment of funding. And so that kind of goes back to digitizing basically what you put online, and be very careful about what you select. You don't have to do everything, right? But the certain things that you do, you want to do it really well so that you're well represented. It would be, I would tell you the same thing if you were translating your, what we used to always have a brochure, that we would hand to someone. You wouldn't want that to be your face. That's your face. That's your product on there. You want it to be professionally done. And so that's what I will be talking to them about today is you need a professional translator that understands not just the language, but the region that you're targeting and the industry that you're working in. And so I think this is a really key point is, yes, most people speak English, but maybe they're not comfortable. And if you're trying to sell something, you want them to be really comfortable, and you want them to not have to work very hard to say yes to your product. Or yes to working with you. So translation, I think, would be very, very helpful. And you can strategically figure out what you want to translate professionally and put out there on the web.
Absolutely, Karen. I concur entirely. In fact, machine translation for me is really just an effort to gain an understanding of the gist of what's going on. They can do the nouns pretty well, but the linkage, the syntax, the ability to connect what is actually being said can sometimes go rather astray. And so that's where it falls short. But remember, when you translate anything that might be used for your website, it can also be repurposed in other environments. And so it can be used for your printed materials. It can be used as in email conversations that you might engage in with potential buyers. And so be strategic, as you said, with regards to the kinds of things that you translate. And my recommendation is when you do that, be selective and go ahead and use professional translation agencies so that you can ensure that what you are communicating is going to be able to be spot on and be able to be used. Of course, many people have some sense of English, and so they are also going to look at the supplemental materials that are available in English to be able to supplement their understanding. But to the extent that you're really targeting in and focusing a particular sales point or an explanation of what your presence is in that particular company, that's in that particular country, excuse me, that's exactly the kind of thing that you would want to focus on with human translation. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was, as we look at this virtual environment, it's somewhat artificial. You don't have the ability to see people directly face to face, except through this visual medium of video using either computers or other kinds of video displays. And so many times some of the sales cues that people are able to key in on when they're working with a potential prospect buyer for their product aren't really there. The ability to shake hands, the ability to look somebody in the eye directly and get the sense that they're looking back at you and you really are making that connection. That is the foundation of establishing a longer-term relationship. I mean, sure, there are transactional kinds of sales that happens. Somebody needs something, they find it, the specs look good, and they go ahead and exercise that transaction. But in a B2B environment, a business-to-business sales environment, many times there can be multiple units that are being sold or being offered. There can be longer-term relationships for sales and after-sales service that are required. And so relationships become key to being able to have longer term and more successful sales prospects. And so really, Karen, the question I have for you is, looking and considering that this environment has a level of artificiality and a level of separation that is just intrinsic to the platform that we're making use of, how do you think that companies can best go about being able to bridge that gap, to be able to move forward, to establish better relationships with the individual? And I would only add, before you take it away, I always see this medium as one of several different ways to go about establishing a relationship with a company, whether it's a direct phone call, whether it is the time at which we can finally jump on that airplane and pay a visit. So maybe it's the precursor to that aspect, but it's part of a whole panoply, really, of techniques and strategies that companies engage in. But again, I'll pose the question. Let's just assume that it's in the virtual environment. Have you found in your research ways that companies have gone about trying to bridge that gap and trying to enhance the sort of connectivity that they might have with their prospects?
So, Jeff, that's a really great question. And I think that if we think of it very simply in terms of relationship building or maintenance, this is where you're going to find some real key value. And then you said earlier, you know, we've had changes over time, right? No one uses, you know, a fax machine really anymore. I mean, I think sometimes, you know, the federal government wants us to send them a fax, but no one really uses the fax machine anymore. But it used to be a really key form of communication. So I think if we think about these digital tools or virtual meetings like we're doing right now, as just a tool in our arsenal, I think this is really important. I think it's easier to digest as well. My dad used to tell me that one of the most important things you can do in order to be a good salesperson is to speak the language of your audience. And what he meant by that was more than just language, and not just English versus, you know, Spanish, for example. It was to modify your delivery so that they were best able to receive the information. And so if we think about digital in terms of one other tool that we have, the digital environment, having a face-to-face meeting, even if it's in the virtual environment, may be actually better than a telephone call or an email, which is even more static, right? So I think that if we think of it in terms of one more tool that we could add to our arsenal, that if we are talking to someone who really wants to see our face and we want to see their face, then a virtual is going to be much better than an email or a telephone call. But we still all have all those tools at our disposal. I think you didn't really ask me this, but I've been thinking about it as I'm sort of trying to watch myself in this very small screen below. There's actually some best practices in terms of a virtual meeting. And they're pretty simple. Common sense is good here. So for example, you want to do a couple of things that I can give you some tips. First of all, step back from the screen. So I'm gonna show you what you shouldn't do. You don't want to get too close to the screen because you're only seeing the top of my head and you can't see my face. So then you've really negated any effects of seeing any expression that I have. So Jeff, you mentioned like we need to see each other, right? So step back from the screen so that you can see my body, right? And if I use my hands, you can see my hands. So the scientists tell us that in order to build trusted relationships, people need to see our hands, right? This is biology. This is how humans interact, right? So even though this is virtual, the fact that you can see my hands, I'm showing you I have nothing to hide. You can't do that if I'm up too close. You can't see me using my hands if I'm too close to the screen. The second tip I would give you, and this is the one that's most difficult for me, is to look at the camera, not at the picture on the screen. And I'm sure I'm not doing a good job because I'm trying to watch Jeff's reaction instead of looking at the camera. And I find it really weird to talk to the camera on my, on my screen, which is really up here. And Jeff's picture is down here. So, but I would tell you that if people can see your face and they feel like you're talking to them, if you could sort of simulate that person to person, that's really important. So step back from the screen. Right now, for example, I'm standing. I have a standing desk at my home office, and so I'm standing, and so that allows me to not slump forward and use bad posture, not get too close to the screen, so I can stand back. And I don't swivel my chair, for example. Don't do that. Don't swivel your chair when you're sitting down. So there's some simple things that you can do there to simulate. One more thing I would add is that what we're really talking about is trusted relationships. In order to make any sale, we all know that we have to, meet the person, do the networking, meet the person, and then we build this trusted relationship, right? And so I think if we think about virtual as being another tool in the arsenal that we have to build those trusted relationships, this is really important. And it becomes, for me at least, less overwhelming. Like, oh my gosh, I have to learn one more new thing, right? Or this is very artificial. Well, just look at it as one more tool that you have to build that trusted relationship. And I would say that even though virtual feels kind of weird, like I can see Jeff, right? But I can't see the audience. It's almost like I'm talking to Jeff, but I know people are out there. I can't see their reaction, right? So it feels very strange. But I would say, though, that it's better than being on the telephone call. Has anyone ever tried to be on a teleconference call where there are people in the room and you're the one on the phone? It's just like virtually impossible to, to have a really quality conversation. And therefore, if you're not having quality communication, it's going to be really difficult for you to build those trusted relationships. So Jeff, I'm not sure if that's where you were going with that question, but I just wanted to give those a couple of tips and talk about, I think a lot of this is a bit overwhelming. I mean, I've said, very transparently, oh my gosh, kicking and screaming onto Twitter. And I still don't do it well, but it's really, really important. And if we can think of things in terms of it's one more tool that we have, or there are more tools that we have, I think it becomes a little bit less overwhelming.
Well, I thought you did a great job of expanding upon that, Karen. And, I, of course, have the same sort of challenge. I think most of us probably on this call with regards to looking in the camera and making sure, because the tendency is to want to look down and certainly see yourself, to see how you're performing, and also see others that might be on the call and represented in like a lower third of the screen. A couple of things came to my mind as you were talking about that, and as we investigate this a little bit further. Clearly, this stuff is not going away. We're going to be able to use it. I mean, it's an inexpensive way to reach out and talk with somebody in another country. There are some limitations. Sometimes you have to work through interpretation, which is also possible, and that's available. But I think importantly, you just want to try to bridge, again, that gap that is made manifest with this virtual environment. I'm kind of curious about if you can expand a little bit about ways in which a company's values or individual values or character can be expressed maybe on the website. And I think people are all aware of the About Us elements that can be on a website, where there's an opportunity to put maybe a headshot of a key individual with the company, along with the discussion, maybe talking about the corporate values, etc. But are there any other ways you think that that might be accomplished in a little bit more effective fashion, to add a little bit of extra sort of special sauce or special capability to, again, try to overcome some of the virtual environments, recognizing that maybe it could be something that could be incorporated even to this medium, so that we have a video conference that's going on. I know we talked before about small animals coming into the room or into the camera shot, and how it can sort of humanize the person that you're talking to, because you see a little bit more how they interact in a less sort of stilted or programmed kind of a fashion, which we all are going to try to do because we know we're on camera and we're trying to convey in a more succinct and clear fashion some of the information that we want to be able to present. But I was just curious if you had any other thoughts in that regard before we jump to a couple more subject areas of relevance.
So that's a really good question. So what's really accelerating this is because of the pandemic and we're all still can't travel like we want to, is there is a blurred line between your work life and your home life. And so really out of necessity, you know, with small animals coming into the screen, for example, we get to see someone's home life more than we ever have before. And Jeff, you and I have talked about this. I'm 51. Like, I've been doing this a long time. I was taught you have to maintain a professional persona. And professional means you don't talk politics, you don't talk religion, you don't talk too much about your pets or your kids, right? I mean, a little bit's good because you want to use those to build your relationships. And when you're in a business meeting, you know, you don't want your cat to come in the room. That's crazy, right? Okay, so here's the difference. Out of necessity, because we're all working in this environment, or many of us are working in an environment, to embrace these blurred lines actually gives you a more personal, it really, as you said, it really makes it more human, and it gives you an opportunity to personalize it. So Jeff, you know, we've talked about when thought my cat was going to interrupt when we did a webinar recently. And I was mortified, right? And then afterwards, I was like, oh my gosh, Karen, you did exactly the opposite of what you should have done. You should have embraced that. Okay, my cat came in the screen. It's Max, sorry, let me get rid of him, right? So so embracing this blurred lines between the personal and the work life is important. Now, I don't mean that you should be, walking around your house showing us, I don't know, your family or whatever, but just embrace it and know that it exists. And that what it does is it makes it more personal. And when we allow ourselves to be a little bit vulnerable, right, that's when we start building those trusted relationships. And so the example of the cat trying to come in the screen with the webinar, we have had so many funny conversations about that since then, with the people who experienced that with me, sharing pictures of their animals and what their tips on what they do to keep the animal out of the screen. That really, I felt, helped me to know those people more, that experienced that with me, and I've had people send me pictures of their cats that weren't even on that webinar, saying, Karen, you expressed you were so mortified by this. Here's what happened to me. And it's that when we use humor and we show up vulnerability, I think that really helps us go to a trusted relationship. Now, specifically on values and corporate, I think that my observation is that there are great big like Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 companies that have been doing this sort of thing for a while. We can think about that, and I think that maybe we think that as a small business that we don't have to do that. What I'm saying to you is I think that's really false, that we really need to start talking about what our values are and what means to us. And that could be something as simple as talking about quality control, not just in terms of like, oh, I have ISO 9000 certification, but why? The why is really important, not just the certification as in this example. Why is quality important to us? Because if our machines are working, optimally, then that helps you, be more productive in your crops, which helps you feed your community, right? So personalizing in that way that really digs deeper into the why you do what you do, I think is really an important aspect to look at. So just embracing the blurred lines between work and home life. And then as we go forward and we can still get on those airplanes, still embrace that, right? So you can build those trusted relationships. And in terms of your corporate image, I think that telling people more the why about what you're doing, why do you have a quality program? Why do you have the employees that you have? How do you treat your employees, right? And talking about it in terms of the humanness of it, I think is going to be really important so that everyone can get to know us better and what's important to us, why we do what we do, so that they're like, okay, not only do they have an amazing product that I want to buy, I like these people and I want to work with them, and that there's that trusted relationship. So I hope that answered your question, Jeff.
It did, Karen. I totally agree with you in terms of those sorts of ways in which you can, again, attempt to bridge the gap. Well, let me go ahead and sort of jump up to a little bit higher level of discussion. And in particular, it begins with, of course, digital content. If we're going to be able to project information using this medium, whether it's using a virtual kind of a video conference, or whether it's the website that you've developed, or whether or not you're integrating it into a virtual trade show or even a hybrid trade show, it all starts with having good content that, again, is purposed towards the activity that you're trying to engage in, the sales activity, and the particular target market, the target audience, the target country, all of those things. And so you start to build a library of resources that you can then sort of mix and match in the environments, depending upon how you want to make use of them at any particular time. One of the things that I found to be particularly attractive is the concept of the hybrid trade show. Now, everybody likes trade shows. I love to go to trade shows. You'd be able to walk from booth to booth and be able to see what is being on offer. You can talk to the salespeople that are staffing that booth and find out a little bit more about their product, what their ability to service that product is in the long term, et cetera. But the advantage of having a hybrid activity where, let's say, somebody might on your behalf either staff a booth for you and or walk around with other booths that are actually physically live, where you've got this mix of virtual stuff along with traditional physical ways of interacting. The beauty of the virtual is, if somebody's giving you a trade lead, you capture that trade lead because they're coming in through this automated or electronic interface and leaving messages for you that they want to have further contact, and they have, typically you would expect that they would have good contact information left. They may have a question, et cetera. So your ability to capture a trade lead, it goes beyond, let's say, just exchanging business cards with a follow-up activity. And so it gives you another lever and another way to be able to interact with prospects to be able to close the sale. And there are some great advances that have been made. You can look at the traditional trade show organizers, whether it's Reed Exhibitions or Coleman. We've been working with them, and they've been doing some great work in terms of putting forward virtual platforms that also present information, capture trade leads successfully. But then if you talk about, for example, I know with what Reed has been doing in terms of some of the hybrid models, you also then have some physical presence along with this virtual presence, and in many ways can enjoy some of the advantages of both those formats. In my view, like we began this program, I really don't see any of this going away. It's nearly going to be another way in which we engage with our foreign prospects to be able to make better sales, make better encounters with them. And so, again, the ability to have digital content that you can repurpose across platforms and be able to make use of that is quite key. Do you have anything else that you want to touch upon, Karen, before we look to opening up the chat box questions?
Jeff, I would just say I made a couple of notes as I was listening to you, and we've been talking. I think this is one of the most really greatest opportunities that I've seen for small business in my career. And what I mean by that is it's an equalizer. So if you're a small business exporter in Kansas, you can use this virtual platforms to get out there without getting on an airplane, right? You can do that today. You can build new relationships, you can hunt for new opportunities, right? And you can also make yourself look bigger than you are, because virtual, right? So virtual, if you have great digital content and search engine optimization and all that kind of stuff, What matters is if you're going to deliver that product. And instead of you having to have an entire team of people out there, you can use the digital environment as a sales force for you. So I think that equalizer, I'm really excited about that for small businesses. I mean, you can look as big as a great big company in the virtual environment. And obviously bigger is not always better, but having this established presence is going to make it easier for you to find those new sales opportunities and relationships. The other thing that I would say is that it's really, 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 really important that you understand what your priority markets are. I know we all want to export to the entire world eventually, but we have to start, one country or one region at a time. So you really have to understand where the demand is, what's the best fit for you, and then all these tools that we've been talking about, you need to fit those to those priority markets. So all this stuff is really, you have to first understand where your market opportunities are. You have to prioritize. And you need to do that anyway, even if we're not talking about virtual. That's the thing I would really stress is prioritizing your markets is absolutely key. And then you can fit all these other tools into that and then go after those markets that you prioritized.
Well, I think it's a great set of thoughts on that, and it really sort of stimulated further thinking on my part too. And we're all in the midst of this investigation to find out the best ways to be able to use these virtual media to be able to sell better overseas. But prioritizing markets is certainly key to being able to engage in international sales generally. But it may also be the case, while it is the case that everyone around the world is to a greater or lesser extent all experiencing this current pandemic and its impact upon the way in which business is conducted, different cultures, different societies have different ways of being able to accept or interact with these media and may key off on certain kinds of information or presentation modes better or less well in terms of that particular market. And one always has to be cognizant of bandwidth issues if you're talking about video conferencing, and that's not going to be uniform across the world. And so there may be other ways in which you have to sort of think outside the box and being able to make use of maybe local distributors or agents or even local offices that are available through state governments. And we certainly have an office in Mexico, and we're looking to be able to expand some of that presence in other locations as well. And then you can make use of the U.S. Commercial Service vehicle. They also have local presence using embassies and consulates located in international destinations. And so one has to really be able to be creative and thoughtful in that sort of varied landscape that you'll be encountering as you look to be able to penetrate those foreign markets and sell more. Well, without taking up further time, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Mr. Chang Lu, who's been dutifully monitoring the chat box and has in fact probably even come up with some questions of his own that we can address here during this session. And I would like to turn it over to him. And Lou, please go ahead and if you have a particular individual, whether it's, and it should be hopefully Karen because she's the featured speaker, but I'd be happy to chime in as required. But really, Karen has been doing so much of this research and has really come forward with a lot of very good information and has a depth of understanding, I think, which is going to serve us all well. So Lou, if you could go ahead and take over and then present any of the chat box questions that have come forward, that'll be a great thing.
Good morning, Jeff. Thank you so much. And Karen, thank you for the informative presentation. We do have a question in the chat box. Question come from Tom. In B2B capital goods, a key question is, what are your needs for these product application? How can virtual marketing assist in gathering this information? I'll give Karen a couple of seconds to think about it, and I'll make a comment. Like Jeff mentioned, my name is Lou. I work for the Kansas Department of Commerce. I focus on export assistance and foreign direct investment attraction. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us. Now back to the translation comment somebody made earlier. There is actually a middle ground. You have machine translation, you have professional translation, and the middle one is machine translation plus a human reviewer in the end. So the costs tend to be slightly lower than a pure professional, but the quality will be greater than a machine-based translation. Just keep that in mind. And also, when you go search out for a translation service provider, make sure you ask who's doing the work. Most of them just use freelancers, and there's nothing wrong with freelancers. Just make sure the one who's doing your project is a native speaker of that country. You know, if you're translating into Chinese, as we all know, there are two different ones. There's a traditional simplified, you know, Cantonese and Mandarin. If one person can do both, I would question it a little bit because, you know, the lingos are different. Just make sure you find a native speaker. Now I'm gonna turn the table back to Karen. Please feel free to share your comment.
Lou, could you repeat that question? My internet, I think, blipped while you were on that question.
The question is, in B2B capital goods, a key question is, what are your needs for this product application? How can virtual marketing assist in gathering this information?
That's a really good question. It's really about, I think, from my interpretation of the question from, I think you said Tom asked this question, is it's really about intelligence gathering. So that maybe you can identify a potential buyer or a potential distributor. And so when you're looking at search engine optimization, for example, especially organic searches, so when you as the company are looking at the capital goods that you produce, right, you know what questions people ask you, but live, you know, people, you know, you're talking to someone trying to make a sale. You know what keywords they're looking for when they have this conversation. And so I think that you could actually gather some intelligence to identify the who has the need in the world from in the virtual world application through search engine optimization, the keywords. So kind of SEO into your keywords into your website, and you're getting an organic hit from that, then that's going to tell you, you know, someone's really interested. It's probably pretty legitimate. And Lou, I don't know if you interpreted that question in a different way, but that's just off the top of my head how I thought the virtual could help. I mean, it's just, I think of the virtual world, kind of like Jeff said, is one more tool. And a little bit further than that in this regard is you're using the digital environment as like an extension of your sales force, right? To gather intelligence or identify leads.
And if I can chime in on that, I think I know which Tom may have asked that question as well. And I also, in my career, have been involved in capital goods sales. And sometimes there's a level of customization that can be incorporated into that particular product. And or there's a requirement for a third-party systems integrator sometimes to be able to take that good and be able to integrate it into a larger architecture in that overseas environment. It strikes me that one of the ways in which one can use B2B virtual marketing in that particular segment is to use it as an interactive tool to be able to further define some of the needs of the customers so that you can both let them know why you excel and why your product will meet their needs, but engage in that back and forth conversation. Many times it's the kind of communication that back when I was engaged in selling machine tools, that there was an inside sales team that really dug into some of the specification needs and tried to make sure that any customization requirements were incorporated into the equipment design and the production. And so I think, and that's probably what was being alluded to, was speaking to the ability to make use of this, not just as a single event, but also as an ongoing mode or tool to be able to, one, establish that better better connection with your prospect, but also better understand what their needs are so that you can better satisfy them and ultimately, hopefully, sell more product to them. So that's kind of the way I took that question as well. Lou, is there another question you want to address?
Currently, there's no other questions in the box. If you have anything, please feel free to chime in. And I just have to do a shameless plug-in. At the Department of Commerce, we do have funding available to help you attend foreign virtual trade shows. And we actually have two on the horizon. We have a common aviation-related trade show. It's all digitalized, all virtual. And we have a Colombian one with MCHEM, and that one's going to take place from June 2nd to 5th. So if you're interested in exporting to Colombia or any other South American country, that will be a good venue for you. Again, both are digitalized, and we're providing funding to those shows through our STEP program, and we can provide up to 100% of the cost. So if you need additional information, please feel free to reach out to us. I don't see any other questions, Jeff.
Well, wonderful, Lou. Thanks for that shameless plug for our services. Do appreciate that. You're always attending to the detail, and I find that, and really, I encourage anybody to reach out and talk to Lou. He's quite knowledgeable and quite able to be able to provide the support in this area. I also want to make a final comment with regards to our next webinar. We are, in fact, looking at, obviously, the ways in which different sales opportunities, migrations of companies and activities have made for increased opportunity for Kansas companies to be able to sell into those markets. And in particular, our next webinar is going to focus on doing business in Vietnam. Vietnam is a very dynamic marketplace. The growth rate of that economy continues to forge ahead. They've had some real challenges, like everybody else, as it relates to trying to control the impact of the pandemic on business. And so you still have to engage in 14-day quarantines, getting approval from the foreign ministry to be able to travel there. But I do know that there are some ways in which you can, again, use this medium to be able to engage in both investigation of market, identifying prospects, and then also moving forward and closer to the sale. So that webinar will be held on March 24th at 9 o'clock, not our typical 10 o'clock time frame, Central Time, because it actually will come from the U.S. Commercial Service representatives based in Ho Chi Minh City and also Hanoi. So it'll be live using a Teams format, presenting doing business in Vietnam. We've kept it as a more generalized kind of presentation because there may be just some basic questions that people have, but they've been engaging in helping others, other businesses around the United States into that marketplace. So they've got some key information, some nice anecdotes, some tips of how to best go about that. And so we really think it's going to be a very good and well-received event. Again, that's at 9 o'clock on March 24th, and we'll be sending out advertising and invite information for that event. And so we've already gone over our time a little bit here, so I think we're at the end of the program. I want to thank everybody for attending this. I certainly want to thank Karen Page and Kansas Global Trade Services for their effort to try to continue this research and continue this work to try to identify best practices. We will have more in the future as we bring some of the recent findings into that understanding. So please, please expect to see more from us in this regard. So again, thanks everybody for attending this event, and we look forward to seeing you next time as well.